In this section, we're going to identify and define who the players are in the intermodal ecosystem. While there are definitely different service offerings in the intermodal space, there are a number of providers that are always going to be a part of operational execution. Before we jump into who those key players are, we'll note on the right-hand side in our image some intermodal activity going on. This happens to be a CSX operation. That's one of the big railroads in the United States, depicting the loading and offloading of 53-footers onto rail cars. And you'll note the chassis on the left-hand side that is there when trailers are taken off of said chassis onto the train or loaded onto the chassis for departure from the terminal. Second bullet, the key players in the domestic intermodal ecosystem are, naturally, the shipper and consignee. We can't do much without a shipper and someone to receive the freight. The origin and destination drayage provider, that's going to be the trucker that's moving that chassis around, hopefully with a trailer on it. The rail operator themselves, we'll identify them later. And both asset-based and non-asset-based, as we see in our two remaining sub-bullets, intermodal marketing companies. We defined IMCs some time ago. We'll see once again that an IMC is essentially a freight forwarder for goods moving on the rail. We will get into a deeper definition in just a bit, but for now, that's what an IMC is. Let's do that deep dive on these players in the intermodal ecosystem. First off, origin and destination drayage provider. They're common carriers, truckers, that provide transportation to and from an origin or destination rail terminal that is also referred to as a ramp. Drayage providers can be independent carriers, those owner-operators or small businesses that we've talked about a couple of times, or part of a larger, very large actually, asset-based company. The railroad, this should be a pretty easy one. These are companies that operate a specific railroad, tracks, terminals, etc., maintains the network, and provides rail cars, terminals, and trailer container handling assets. In the U.S., there are 7 large railroads and a number of smaller regional operators. We're going to be looking at those larger 7 railroads and their networks to support the intermodal movement of goods around the country. Here's that bigger definition, first off, of an asset-based intermodal marketing company, an IMC. IMCs are companies that contract for space with railroads and resell that space to shippers. That should sound pretty familiar because that's what ocean freight forwarders do and that's what air freight forwarders do. Second sentence, whereas an asset-based IMC does not own the railroad, they do own and operate domestic trailers, drayage tractors, etc. IMCs offer integrated services to shippers that include the origin drayage to a ramp, line haul transportation, that rail transportation, and drayage from the destination ramp to a designated facility. Classic domestic intermodal, truck to rail to truck. Conversely, a non-asset-based intermodal marketing company, an IMC, are companies that offer integrated intermodal services, as we just described, but that do not own the equipment they use. This type of IMC contracts with both drayage operators and railroads to offer end-to-end rail solutions to shippers. They are coordinating with dray operators. They are coordinating with the railroads to provide services. They do the same thing as asset-based IMCs. They just don't own the equipment that they do it with. Decisions on whether to use an asset-based IMC or a non-asset-based IMC are up to the shipper. As always, we're not here to advocate one over the other. We're just identifying the parties. That was a pretty short list of who the main players are in intermodal, but they are the most important ones. Now, we're going to start talking about rail infrastructure and intermodal services. Really quite important for importers that use intermodal transportation to understand what is the infrastructure, where are the railroads, what part of the country do they run through, who are the operators of these railroads, where are the terminals, and what services can we use in an intermodal context to benefit our value proposition as an importer. Before we start this slide, let's just say that we kind of like that image on the right-hand side because it really depicts what domestic intermodal transportation is. We see the half of a truck on the left-hand side of the image and the half of a locomotive on the right. Just a good visual way to depict what we're talking about. First bullet. In order for U.S. importers to make the best use of intermodal transportation, it is essential to not only understand the ecosystem of players, but how physical rail networks and supporting assets are integrated. Who the players are and what's the network. That's what we're working on. Second bullet. The above is especially true for importers that utilize transload operations to load domestic trailers that have to be delivered to rail terminals. Site selection for an ocean port that has a supporting transload infrastructure is important. Of equal importance is the proximity of the closest rail ramp to those operations to get goods out into the domestic environment. Last bullet. Without a detailed understanding of the intermodal infrastructure, both transportation costs and lead times could escalate or become unpredictable. And needless to say, at this point in Module 10, increased cost and unpredictable lead times are something we want to avoid. Because transload facilities are mostly located close to ocean ports, the importer must understand the links that exist, as we just said, between all ports of discharge and the railroads that support a given port or region. We as importers, as we're looking to select ocean ports, ports of discharge in the U.S., to distribute goods out into the domestic market, we have to have that link with the rail network. Second bullet. Additionally, the importer has to be knowledgeable about a railroad's geographic coverage, the location of the railroads, and miles of track. And of course, ramp locations at the origin rail ramp and the destination ramp. Proximity to ocean ports for the origin ramp, proximity to customers at the destination ramp. Last bullet here, based on the port of discharge, location of the destination DC or store, and the supporting rail infrastructure, an importer can decide on how best to route intermodal shipments. We as an importer need to know all this stuff. Clearly, the main player in the intermodal ecosystem is the railroad operator. Second bullet, known as Class 1 railroads. The largest operators in the U.S. are the following. First, the UP, the Union Pacific. The BNSF, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. The CSX, Norfolk Southern. Canadian National and Canadian Pacific, and yes, they are Canadian railroads. And then Kansas City Southern. We'll have a pretty good look at the overall rail network, but for now we could say that the UP and BNSF, they are left to right railroads, meaning they traverse the United States from left to right. Norfolk Southern, a little more regional, starting in Norfolk, Virginia. Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, a little more top to bottom, coming down from Canada into the United States. And then Kansas City Southern, a little bit more regional, but also with strong coverage down into Mexico. Their headquarters, of course, being in KC, Kansas City. We're going to stop here. And when we come back, we will have a look at that rail network in the U.S., color-coded based on the railroads that we just mentioned. After that, we'll continue on with our conversation on intermodal transportation. Come back soon.